Good evening to all the participants. Yesterday, we had a very spirited and wonderful session and discussion. So it is on that note that I would like to make today's presentation. Merelin, if we could have the PowerPoint, please.
Is it visible, sir?
Not yet. Yeah, it's visible.
Sir, I'll make it like this because it gets hanged at times if I put on the full screen presentation.
No problem.
As long as it's visible, I'll keep it this way. Okay.
So I've titled this presentation, Basundhara, Tagore, Indian Knowledge Systems and Ecology. Now, when you go to the website of the Indian Knowledge Systems of the Government of India, we encounter certain terms whereby, the website asks us to look at what is it that makes it uniquely Indian, and also asks us how it is radiated to the community at large. And therefore, what we are looking at, I think the government wants to look at, is how Indian knowledge systems can actually be implemented in a modern context. It is within this particular structure that I'd like to look at Rabindranath Tagore's experiment with ecology in poetry. Let me add a caveat here. I am not going to look at Rabindranath's prose texts in great detail. Neither am I going to look at the drama. I'm going to restrict myself to poetry and art today. Right? I thought it would be a nice idea to end this FDP by looking at some of the most beautiful renderings of nature in art from Shantiniketan. So, how does one look at a knowledge system and apply it within a different context? That is what I'm going to take a look at, and I've titled this Basundhara, Tagore, IKS and Ecology. Now, obviously, the question will come, what can we take from Tagore? But that is, again, something we can take forward in the discussion session. Right. If I can move on to the next slide, please. Right. Now, as I habitually do, I make a central argument or an abstract for me so that I can restrict myself within the time frame. I'm going to argue that Tagore's ecological consciousness will be drawn from the Upanishads. I'm going to look at two of the shlokas that he uses and why it becomes so important to him. I'm going to suggest that the process of ecological adaptation or ecological consciousness is wedded in Rabindranath to a process of sanctification. Therefore, there is a certain structure within which Tagore operates, which is again marked by aesthetics. And the central point of this presentation is going to be ecology as a performative element, ecological consciousness as performative. I would argue that Rabindranath's salient contribution lies in this, that ecology is both a performative consciousness and a pedagogical consciousness. How he does that is something I'm going to take up. I'm also going to look at his engagement with science, because Rabindranath is writing, after all, remember, most of his major writings come in the 1920s, 30s, even before that, when the modernist incursion into ecology, into nature is taking root, and the First World War is breaking out all over Europe. And finally, I would like to see what or how Shantiniketan took forward Rabindranath's ideas and how these were placed, or how the ecological consciousness is sort of continued through a practice of art, right? Because we have discussed threadbare different kinds of narrative traditions. I would just widen the field a little more to see if that can be expressed in artistic traditions, everyday art, right? Not art that is secluded, but art that is placed within nature, that is part of nature, and that will foreground nature. So this is what the structure of my presentation is going to be. If I could move on to the next slide, please. Right. So if you look at Rabindranath's use of the mantras in the Upasana Griha, where the Brahma Upasana would be held every Wednesday, it still is. The dominant hymn that he uses is taken from Isa Vyasa Upanishad. Now, my Sanskrit is not up to the mark, so I will not go into, reciting the Sanskrit. Please forgive me. The English leads like this. But Tagore was very fond of the word stena taktana bhunjita magritha, which, that hymn argues the whole universe is enclosed or enveloped in God. And also he dwells or resides in the entire universe. So the oneness in the sort of immanence of God within everything. God is in everything and everything is clothed within God. Both are simultaneously true. Whatever is moving in this universe is all penetrated and also enclosed by him. All that is living or non-living, pleasing or otherwise, planets, stars, or even self, our Atma, is pervaded by him. This perspective can lead you to recognizing his omnipresence, right? I'm sorry that has sort of gone within the flow. All right, so the oneness with all. And therefore, Tagore says, if you realize this, or rather the Upanishad says, Tagore adapts, that if you realize it, you will realize that everything is blissful, right? And therefore, you will be able to renounce also all, and you will not covet for anybody else's wealth. Right? Now, what Tagore is drawing from here is therefore the seamlessness between the human existence and the natural existence. So this breach between man and nature is erased for Tagore because, the Godhead or the whole, concept of the Brahman on which the Brahmo faith is based is within everything, right? Therefore, this is the first philosophical root, as it were, to Tagore's ecological consciousness. So, he can accept nature as not essentially, that there's no alienness between the human and the natural. It is all the same. But, from the Tena Taktana Bhunjita, Rabindranath will move to another interesting hymn, and that is in the next slide, where Rabindranath, this is very, very fond, Rabindranath was very fond of this. Right, this is from the Rig Veda, right? It's Madhu Vata Ritayate, Madhuskaranti Sindhava. Again, the translation is given there. For us who are devotees of the supreme truth, may the winds blow sweetly, may the rivers flow sweetly, may the herbs be to us sweet and beneficial. May there be sweetness during the day and during the night. May the particles of earth be carrying sweetness forever. Now, this hymn, Rabindranath repeatedly uses and sees, very interestingly, within nature and the human, the ebb and flow of a rhythm. Right? This concept of rhythm is very important to the poet Rabindranath, and therefore he recurrently talks about this rhythm in his poetry. I'll give you a few examples. This is not there in the slides, but nevertheless, let us take a look at some of his poems. Right? He says, I will not demand immortality at your door, only that you should place a holy mark with your clay upon my forehead. And then he asks, amidst the sky full of suns and stars, the world full of life, I have found a place. That is why my song wakes in wonder. Interestingly, it is the sense of wonder and joy that Rabindranath brings to nature. That the seamless movement of a rhythm that is within nature is also reflected in the human sort of rhythm of joy, wonder, death, rebirth that he talks about. And he said, I have laid my feet on the grass as I walk down forest paths. My heart is thrilled at the sudden scent of flowers. Gifts of delight are scattered everywhere. That is why my song wakes in wonder. So the madhu that nature has to offer, it is Tagore who drinks this nectar, as it were. It is not something, Rabindranath's philosophy is not one of asceticism, where he renounces life or renounces nature or accepts nature as a kind of withdrawal. Nature is accepted because it offers the senses a joy that gives us a sense of the rhythm of life. I will repeat that nature, you drink in, while drinking in and having that feeling of joy and wonder, you also escape into another consciousness which gives you the sense of a rhythm, a presence, and therefore a sense of oneness. It is this philosophical, argument that he makes in one of his writings. He says, we can draw a deep and secret joy from nature only because we feel a profound kinship with it. These green, fresh, ever-renewing trees, creepers, grasses, and lichens, these flowing streams, the cycle of seasons, the stream of heavenly bodies filling the limitless sky, we are related to all this through some blood beat in our pulse. We are bound by the same rhythm as the entire universe. And all of Tagore's ecological consciousness, poetic consciousness, is to make sense of this rhythm. How does one approximate this rhythm within the human consciousness is what, or within the poetic structure is what Rabindranath is looking at. That is the crux of his ecology. Now, I will argue, of course, again, that Rabindranath's formative years were very important in terms of the 1890s, when he comes for the first time in presence of the vast expanse of nature, when he travels within the Padma boat across the length and breadth of Bangladesh. He had a zamindari there. He said he did lesser zamindari and more asmandari, right? And he said, and in the letters that he wrote, which are called Chinna Patrabali, or the broken letters, he says, I have a very deep, intimate, truly living relationship with all nature. And I know and feel that affection, the bond to be my truest and best dharma. It's interesting. He's saying my truest and best dharma is this intuitive, empathetic consciousness of nature. It is a constant, everyday dharma, right? So it's not one-off, I see one rainbow in the sky and my heart leaps up. It is everyday nature in all its forms. Its observance is my constant act of worship. What a beautiful line, you know. He's saying that the everyday observance of nature, feeling the pulse of nature is my act of worship. Yesterday, a mother goat was sitting on the grass by the road, serene, tender, entirely at ease, with her infant snuggling against her in total comfort, total security. The profound love and wonder, replete with rasa, that the sight aroused in me is what I would call my religious observance, right? It is not a political, agenda that he creates out of nature. Rabindranath is not an activist in that sense of the term. His consciousness of nature is far deeper, far more profound, right? Now, most of you are familiar with two of Rabindranath's major plays as, ecological texts. One is Raktakarabi, which talks about mining, and the rebellion of Nandini, who sort of defeats the mechanistic impulse and, the individualism and love triumphs. More important, as a play, is Muktadhara. Muktadhara is about a waterfall, and the engineer Vibhuti, he wants to shackle this waterfall, and he worships. And again, that word comes in. There's a song which says Namo Jantra, Namo Jantra, Namo Jantra, right? And on the other hand is the young prince, Abhijit, who will give up his entire life to stop this dam being built, because the village of Shiftarai downstream will be completely destroyed. Abhijit destroys the dam, is drowned in the process, but his act of self-sacrifice to prevent the closure of the river, as it were, by the human dam, is one of Tagore's most important, what we can call statements on ecology in this play. This play, incidentally, was launched in 1922, written in 1922, but it was not as popular as the other Tagore plays, probably because it was out ahead of its time, but we see its relevance in the way that, the debate on the dams on rivers is now unfolding, right? So for Rabindranath, the rhythm of nature, the flow of nature, any rupture in that or any sort of dam on that would have been antithetical to the rhythm of nature, as it were. But more importantly, I think what Rabindranath is also talking about is this question of how does one transmit this? How does one put this knowledge system within pedagogy, right? How does one sensitize others to it? And he says that we have a deep old age relationship with this earth, the sea. How can we express it unless we feel it deep inside us, face to face with solitary nature? Now, have you ever wondered why the young Tagore, travels from Kolkata to Shantiniketan? Right? Part of it is to decolonize, but he's traveling from a larger city to a rural hamlet, and I'll show you what kind of hamlet it was. He's pawning his wife's jewelry. He's sort of, his wife is dying, his younger son is dying, two of his daughters will die, his father will die. So immense suffering, within the face of immense suffering, is coming back to nature, right? And he says that until and unless we feel it deep inside us, face to face, how can I impart this consciousness, right? And he says about his students, he says, the religion of spiritual harmony is not a theological doctrine to be taught as a subject in class for half an hour each day. So ecology cannot be taught as a course. You see, all of our children, they have, a course in environmental studies, but what effect does it have? It is so isolated. Such a religious ideal can only be made possible by making provision for students to live in intimate touch with nature, daily to grow in an atmosphere of service offered to all creatures, tending trees, feeding birds and animals, learning to feel the immense mystery of the soil and water and air. So when Tagore conjures the concept of the ashram, the tapovan, he is in fact creating an atmosphere where a familiarity with nature will provide an alternative scheme of education for the children. While there will be modernity, the contact with nature will bring a profound ecological consciousness that cannot be overridden, right? This is where Tagore's intervention lies. Everyday awakening of the ecological consciousness, not through books, not through activism, but through everyday interaction. And that interaction will take place, I will argue, through certain performative gestures. Now let us move on to the next slide, please. Okay, I'm sorry, you have already there. So did I talk about the last one? If I could go back one slide. Right. Oh, yeah, the next one, please. Next one, sorry. Right. So again, this is his ecological text, again, a book of poems called Bono Bani, the message of the wild. And this is where he outlines a language of nature, as it were. It penetrates reality to reach the deepest layers of our consciousness. It draws upon a language that has survived thousands of years with the human. It is the musical instrument of nature. It replicates the rhythm inherent in life itself. It traces within them the murmurs of eternity, where the spirit of liberation, peace, and beauty lurk. Right? So this is how he's theorizing this idea of the ecological consciousness. If we can move on to the next one, please. And let me just suggest how he articulates this in poetry, right? Because poetry is also another narrative. And remember that these poems are being taught to children in Shantiniketan. These poems are being radiated out into the world in Bangla and in translation. And in Prakriti Pratishod, the aesthetic 1921, he says, I throw away the vestiges of sannyas. I inhale the joy of living. Where the great vessel of the world floats, I submit to its motion. I live with the millions who travel in it. So nature is to be engaged with. Nature is to be lived in. Nature is to be lived with. Now, the only person whom I can say, Rabindranath is so profoundly, dealing with nature, or the poet, is, of course, William Wordsworth. And Rabindranath, to a certain extent, was influenced by Wordsworth's consciousness, but that is the matter of another discussion. Let us take a look at the next, slide, for example. And this is where I want you to look at what Shantiniketan actually was when Tagore and Debendranath were settling in here. So you look at this vast emptiness, this nothing, there's no greenery here, right? Only the the Tal Gach, as it were, the Tal trees. And Rabindranath has a poem, the Tal tree on 1 foot, looking all around it and sort of winking at the sky, as it were. The next one, please. Give you an idea of this vast, this is called Kowai, there were railway tracks being laid and there were, tracts of land which were being dug up, right? So this would what Shantiniketan would look at during Tagore's early period. We need to understand that Tagore was also greening this place. He understood that for an institution to be built up, for a tapovan to be built up, he had to green it. And therefore, his great ally in this would be a Scottish thinker called Patrick Geddes. Now, Geddes was born and brought up in Scotland. He was a town planner, incidentally, but he planned the map of Shantiniketan, as it were, the outline of Shantiniketan. And Geddes's theory was, his maxim was, through leaves, L-E-A-V-E-S, we live, L-I-V-E. So this profound attachment of greening a place, making it not only habitable, but lush and plenitude of nature is something that Rabindranath brings. Please remember that Rabindranath was one of the most well-traveled of all people. Everywhere that he went, Rabindranath actually brought back plants. So that is very interesting, isn't it? And everywhere that he went, he planted trees. So in Germany, where he went, he planted a tree. In Sri Lanka, where a school was built on the model of his school, he planted a tree, right? So the tree became, therefore, the central part of his, ashram, as it were. Now, this is in opposition to what Devendranath wanted. For Devendranath, let me just, before I move on to Devendranath, let me show you 1 or 2 pictures, 1 or 2 paintings. I hope this you will sort of admire these. This is, next one, please, Amelia. This is the Kowai, which was painted by one of Shantiniketan's greatest blind artists, Binod Bihari Mukherjee. Binod Bihari had limited eyesight when he painted this. In his final years, he became totally blind. But look at the desultory, barren landscape that at once provoked his poetic consciousness and again limited it. The next one, please. So these are all, Shantiniketan landscapes as Tagore would have seen it, right? The next one, please. I thought, it would be an interesting way to see how an artist, that is the Kowai scroll. That scroll, by the way, is almost the length of two rooms. So we've just condensed that one part of it. But Binod Bihari was, creating this vastness of the Kowai landscape in these scrolls. And you can see once again the tree, swept in the storm, the bottom picture, as it were. Right. The next one, please. Again, these are parts of the scroll again from Binod Bihari. It's something which I wanted to show you because you see, part of Tagore's, as I said, eco-consciousness was putting it up for display. That nature, if you have to feel nature, there are various ways of it. If you have to feel the breadth of nature, one could be poetry. The other language that he was seeking consciously through Nandalal Bose and his other ashramites and Kalabhavan, the center of art, was, painting. The other, of course, language that he took was music. But since, most of you would not understand the Bangla tune, I haven't put the music up. Instead, I've put a few pictures up. If you can move to the next slide, please. Right. Now, it was Devendranath's center. right? Devendranath wanted this to be a Brahmo retreat, that this would be, you know, uh, uh, he had a trust deed where he said three things would be there. One is that there would be a Brahmo Mandir. So this is the Upasana Griha, as we call it. There would be a library, and there would be a rural fair. That was what the trust deed for Shantiniketan was from Tagore's father. What Rabindranath did instead was he allied this religiosity, or this I will call sanctification, but the priority became education and nature. So if you could move on to the next slide, you can immediately see the sense of greenery that is in the background. This is the Upasana Griha as it is right now. Right. Now, incidentally, just by the side of this Upasana Griha lies the house of an English teacher, lay the house of an English teacher. The next slide, please, who never came to the Brahmo Upasana. And the ashramites, you know, they complained to Tagore that this man never comes to our ashram to pray. And if you look at that house is called Talodhaj, right? Talodhaj. That house is built around the tree. It's one of the unique houses of Shantiniketan, built around that tal tree. So this intimate, you know, existence of man and the nature. And Tagore responded to this complaint. He said that he does not need to come to a upasana because his upasana is in his house. He is worshipping the tree. He is at one with nature. In fact, Tejesh Chandra Sen died young. He died of a heart attack. And when he was found dead, clasping the tree. So, you see, what Tagore was therefore doing was inculcating a consciousness within his teachers and within his students as well. And therefore, the concept of the tapovan, the concept of the ashram becomes so very important. The next one, please. Right. Now, along with this, you see, Rabindranath was also building houses. And this is a house called Shamali. I'm sorry, the earlier one, Shamali, that he built. This was Gandhiji's favorite house where he lived. This was built with mud, with thick, you know, walls. And inside those walls, he asked the local artisans to come and put in clay pots, right? A technique to, you know, protect the house from heat, cool it. So not only was Rabindranath, you know, moving away from or experimenting, certainly not moving away. He built brick houses, no problem, but he was also trying to create within or through his residences also the potential of adapting knowledge systems of architecture into our own kind of into residences. And in Shantiniketan, we now have residences with hollow bricks, so that, you know, again, the cool houses can be built so that air conditioning is minimalized. Now, not only that, on the walls of these houses, if you go to the next slide, Rabindranath was also asking Ramkinkar Bej, who has been one of India's greatest painters, sculptors, to create with coal tar, local available material, you know, pictures and engravings of the Santhal families, the indigenous tribes, animals, so that, you know, a Tagorean residence would also be a perpetual example of the human existing within the natural, using natural materials, and also recognizing and aestheticizing This is very important, that a stray dog on the road is something which we generally avoid. But here is Rabindranath accepting it as part of his household and also aestheticizing it. Similarly, with the Santals, the figure of the Santal is seen as somebody who is part of the university, who is not out of it, right? So what an incredible example of an ecological consciousness being pedagogically revealed through daily living. That is where I see and where I talked about ecological consciousness as performative rather than, preaching in that sense of the term. Next, take a look at the Tagore's brick houses. This is one of the first houses that he built. If you take a look at that house, it's interesting in the sense that Tagore had one philosophy. He said, or rather two philosophies. He said that the tallest house in Shantiniketan would not be taller than the tallest tree, right? Because he did not want man to dwarf nature, right? So, parity with nature. And the second thing that he instructed the architects of the house was to make the rooms smaller and the windows larger so that the consciousness always moved outwards. And remember that he was greening this place. And you can see that sense of green, the creepers all around, the trees, the flora and the fauna, the smell. In fact, if you look at Tagore's poetry, Tagore uses something which is called synesthesia, roop, sparsh, gandho, right? The sense of touch, the sense of sound, the sense of smell, and this synesthetic quality of existence is something which Rabindranath was perpetually sort of cultivating. He was bringing in exotic trees, he was bringing in the flora and the fauna from different parts of the world and making it part of Shantiniketan. The motto of Shantiniketan is Yatra Vishwam Bhavateka Neeram, where the whole world makes its home in a single nest. We can also extend this and say where the whole world's botany sort of meets in a single nest, right? So it is in this way, that nature far and wide, nature close and near is all part of the Shantiniketan experiment. This is what I call by a sense of performative ecology. The next one, please. Now, along with this is an interesting house that Tagore built for himself, although unfortunately he could not sleep in it for many years. This was the tree house that a Japanese, orchard maker and carpenter, Kasahara, built for him, right? Now, I'm not saying that, this was a very successful experiment of that, but what I'm trying to communicate to you is the students of Shantiniketan would have seen this happening, right? Of seeing Rabindranath try out something of this sort. And, in their everyday pedagogic practices, this would have been part of their consciousness, that the man and the tree are one and the same, right? The next one, please. Now let us, move on from the pictures to something which is more theoretical. So I had stopped at, this concept of not being an ascetic, and he talks about Prakriti Pratishodh. And he says the hero is a sannyasi who had been striving to gain a victory over nature by cutting away the bonds of all desires. A little girl, however, brought him back from his communion with the infinite to the world and into the bondage of human affection. Right? So coming back, the sannyasi realized that the great is to be found within the small, the infinite within the bounds of form, and the eternal freedom of the soul in love. So love nature and love the men and the community around you is what Rabindranath would be telling his students, that the love for nature would naturally be an extension for the love of the community around. Okay, if you can move on to the next one, please. Now, in this experiment, Rabindranath was using another very interesting tool. You see, my lecture has not moved into theoretical discussions, but I'm taking a look at how pedagogical experiments are working. Indian knowledge systems are being part of the pedagogical process again. Now, Tagore looked at the concept of the village fair, which has been part of our, everyday consciousness, Mela. And he says that, when you go to teach people, they accept you very reluctantly. But when you are in a Mela, when you are in a spirit of joyousness and festivity, it is then that you open your minds and your senses in its fullest, right? And therefore, he created a series of festivals about nature, which would again alert the students to the flora and the fauna, celebrate nature, and again spread this eco-consciousness, right? So that is the Basant Utsav, which has now become one of the great. We are now afraid of this because it has become so large and it has become such a commodity spectacle. So some of Tagore's, in fact, original intentions have become rather subservient to the market right now. But look at that. And he wrote songs, that this celebration of nature would take place with the sight of nature, with the smell of nature, and with the sound of Tagore's song. So for each and every festival, he wrote countless songs. So this is the song of the Basant Utsav. The doorway to the southerly is open today. Come, a spirit of spring, in the new greenery and flowers, in the pollen and fragrance, unfurl your dress to the wide open sky. Similarly, he would have separate festival for Barsha Mongol. He would have a separate festival for Poush Utsav, which is again the winter fair in Shantiniketan. So celebrate every season. Be aware of it. Open your minds to it. The next one, please. Right. Well, he talks about sheath, winter in Purobi. He says, it is not merely a song of the road, a song of the end, only it seems that the end is near. Deep within them is the call of return. O winter, you conceal within the deep nights and barren branches what you will return in spring. We were talking about that cycle, and you can see the pulse of this song, talking about that pulse, almost reminding you of Shelley's poem, of Keats, where he talks about autumn, the autumn ode, and Shelley when he talks about spring or winter. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? Right? The next slide, please. So now again, this performative is something which you need to witness, you need to feel. Otherwise, you need to see, otherwise the performative doesn't come through. Now, this is a rather old picture, but you can recognize somebody in the picture. Right in the middle, you have our former Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, who was a student of Shantiniketan, who was participating in the Basant Utsav. Let us take a look at how it would look in real life. The next slide, please. You see, this is how the students would celebrate Basant Utsav now. Take a look at the ornaments that, again, Rabindranath had one more thing to suggest. Because, he was establishing Shantiniketan in a poor community, a rural community. He said that the community could not be something of an ostentatious, or the university could not be something of an ostentatious, huge building, which would be alienated from the community at large. So simple dresses, and if you look at those ornaments that the students are using, they use it even today, it's the flowers of the polash flower, which they are decking themselves up with. Use natural colors. Now, look at the irony of it. This is something which I would like to point out. today, the Basundhara has become such a spectacle. You know, we have 3 lakh, 4 lakh people coming in, so that we've been forced to shut it down for the last 2 years, only for the university community. Because all the people who come from outside want to have Palash flowers, wear ornaments, and therefore they destroy the Palash before the Basundhara. Now there has been a total ban on using Palash flowers. So again, it's interesting what Rabindranath thought and how, you know, modern commodity culture sort of absorbs it into a kind of a spectacle and creates its own eco-disaster, right? So Tagore's eco-consciousness, in that sense, has now, with the influx of tourists, become some kind of an eco-disaster, so that we have had to intervene very proactively in this matter. Right, next slide, please. Now, apart from this, Tagore also brought in another festival, and this is a festival that has been taken up almost pan-Indian. And this is where I call sanctification an important tool of Tagore. Now, Tagore realized that, you know, for nature to be venerated, nature had to be sanctified in a certain way. It had to be part and parcel of both our ally, our relative, and our God at the same time. So he designed the Vriksharopan, right? So this is the tree planting festival. You see, this is a very beautiful picture where Tagore, you know, is sitting on that Vedi of his, reciting poems, and in front of him lies the sapling. So the sapling in the Vriksharopana is brought in a palanquin, like a new bride, planted on the Vedi and worshipped, and, you know, children all around sing of the 5 elements of nature: aesthetics, sanctification, ecological consciousness. And again, one of the hallmarks of Tagore's consciousness is that, you know, one has to replicate the beauty of nature. So if you take a look at the next slide, please. You know, in a letter to Pratima Devi, July 1928, Tagore says, the ceremony was held with your bokul plant. No plant, the bokul is a very common flower in Bengal. No plant in the whole of creation could have dreamt of such a ceremony. Young girls, beautifully dressed, accompanied it with the sound of conches to the site of the ceremony. Hymns were chanted. I read poems for the occasion. The sapling was welcomed with garlands and incense. It resides in all splendor now. If you look at the next slide again, what were these poems like, right? It says, let the flag of victory over dreariness flutter, O great force of life. Bless these particles of dust today with the softness of your grace. O child of nature, let the force of life fill you. Gather the blessings of light and wind to attain the sap of youth. Again, poetry, narrative, as a way of grafting this knowledge into the young mind, right? Note the word that he uses. In Vrikshabandhana, or the worship to the tree, which I will read out later on, he calls the tree his neighbor. He does not call it the inanimate tree. He says, you are our porshi, our neighbor, right? And reiterating the proximity of the human and the natural. Next one, please. I couldn't resist bringing some of these poems. So these are the poems on the 5 elements that 5 young boys would recite as the sapling was being sanctified, as it were, right? One probably poem, one part of it I can read, the rest you can see on your screens. Earth, clasp all your treasures to your heart, initiate them to eternal friendship with mankind. That the concept of eternal friendship with mankind. I'm sure in many of your institutions too, and I've seen this happening everywhere, the sapling is being planted. But what Tagore is doing is, because he's dealing with young minds, remember, And to aestheticize this and to sanctify it, drills the briksharopon into the minds of the young students. The next slide, please. This is, Basundhara. This is the poem that he writes. Take me back to your lap, O earth. Bless me within your shadow. I exist within your beauty and radiate myself all around the joy of spring. So the poet becomes, Tagore was called the Indian Shelley. Shelley once wrote that the poet is a Vates. He's a prophet. He's a prophet because the ideas of greatness, he's like a fading coal who radiates this into the universe, right? So the poet is the one who feels the rhythm of the universe and radiates it into pedagogy by sort of bringing this nature into life, right? So from the deep bowels of the earth, you heard the call of the sun, O tree. You witnessed the first beat of life. You uttered the call of life in the dreariness. Your life and shade sustain me. I come forward, a messenger of man, dressed in your garland. I offer my poetry to you. Again, this is not man triumphing over nature. This is man surrendering to nature, bringing the garland of friendship. The next one, please. This is again another picture. The Briksharopana became a festival that Rabindranath validated through and through in his career. He was present in Shantiniketan almost always. In one of those years when he's in America, he writes that my mind is today in Shantiniketan with the Briksharopana, right? And let us take a look at how it is, in more colorful form, how the sapling is brought in the palanquin, as I said. The next slide, please. This is how, the entire landscape would look like when the sapling is being brought in that palanquin, as you can see. Again, the aesthetic consciousness, the performativity, and the beauty of nature being reflected in the beauty of the university is what Rabindranath would also look at. Now, was this all? No. Because you have to remember that Shantiniketan was also an extremely dry place. It was a place which was marked by an acute scarcity of water. And Rabindranath was trying to bring agriculture into Shantiniketan, transform, along with Leonard Elmhurst, who was bringing in seeds. He had sent his own son to America to study agriculture, remember. And he was trying to transform this place into a more greener, productive, prosperous place, right? Therefore, in the next slide, he started and validated through another ceremony. Next slide, please. Right? He talked about the protection of the soil, right? And he said, let us all return to the soil that lays the corner of its garments and waits for us. Life rears from her breast, flowers bloom from her smiles. Her call is the sweetest music. Her lap stretches from one corner to the other. What was he asking his students to do? He was asking his students to carry human waste to these places. He was asking them to carry waste of animals to the Sriniketan and transform the soil, give more productivity to the soil. You could sense many of the gardens were aghast at the fact that young boys were being made to carry human waste to regenerate the soil, as it were. But Rabindranath devised another festival where he sanctified this element of farming. Because you see, in India at that point of time, probably still, agriculture is considered to be a lower profession, right? We have the Bhadralok, the gentleman in Bengal. I can talk about my state, but I'm sure it might be the same in other states. And we call about the Chasha, or the farmer in the rural landscape. And the Bhadralok is always more important than the Chasha. And the act of farming was seen as an act of menial labor lowly in its quality. What Tagore did was create a festival for this occasion. Next slide, please. This is a very rare picture of Rabindranath actually taking part in this festival, what he called the Halakarshan. Hal and Karshan. What would be the plow festival, right? So, and he asked his, you see, part of it was he was asking his students, his compatriots, to see that farming was something which was to be venerated, which was something to be recognized as an equally important activity, almost akin with a religion. And he asked his compatriot, the great painter Nandalal Bose, who incidentally painted our constitution, if you are aware of this, all the illustrations in the Constitution of India is done by the Shantiniketan artist, most importantly by Nandalal. So he asked his compatriot to paint a mural for him so that the students would look at it every day. Let us take a look at how this mural went. So on the left-hand side of the mural are the rural people. You see, the tribal people, the indigenous people, right, who have come to celebrate this moment of farming. Next, please. At the center of this mural, you see Tagore, you know, the bearded man on the side, and you see a Brahmin, as it were, sanctifying this process. And on the right-hand side, what do you see? Next slide, please. You see the university people having come there with their offerings. So on the left, the community. On the right, the university. And Tagore standing as a bridge in between, right? So, you see, ecological consciousness is also, you know, linked with organic farming. Tagore was creating a repository of local seeds. You know, he was creating seed banks. He was experimenting with, you know, the indigenous forms of watering, manure. He was bringing in indigenous ways of treating people through the Ayurveda, right? Even as he was also dabbling in allopathy and homeopathy. So all these aspects, all the knowledge systems side by side, and the university not as an isolated phenomenon, but within nature and radiating out to the community at large, right? The next slide, please. This is one of the most famous paintings of Nandalal Bose, once again, of the Shantiniketan ashram. And you can see there the child sitting under the trees, the birds, the deer around him, although I guess at that point of time, the deers were not really frequent in Shantiniketan, and you have the woman with going on in her daily life. Once again, see how nature, community, and the university are coming into contact. Now, the question is, therefore, did Tagore shun machines? Right. Next slide, please. So, could modernity not come in? But what Rabindranath witnessed and what the nationalism lectures were all about is the First World War and the great greed and exploitation of nature. So he repeatedly cautions about this. The temptation of an inordinately high level of living, which was once confined to a small section of the community, became widespread. So the ideal of simple living versus excessive use of natural resources is something that Tagore is recurrently warning us about, right? And this, he says, leads on to the war, because when you've exhausted your own resources, you now pounce on others, right? And you exploit other countries. And therefore, you know, in this mad rush for resources, you have a great war looming. Next one, please. So he saw, you know, therefore, nationalism as a kind of a menace because it is manufactured by the greed of the Western countries and marked by great destruction. Right? And therefore, you know, he asks his compatriot Elmhurst to come over, who came from America and started this experiment of Sriniketan. So on the one hand, you have Shantiniketan as an abode of peace, nature. On the other hand, you have Sriniketan, the abode of plenty, where he's experimenting with indigenous and Western forms of agriculture to make the country more prosperous, to bring the farmer into the limelight. The next slide, please. So we also need to understand that Rabindranath was one of the first experimenters with modern science and modern agriculture. As it is, Rabindranath, his eldest son, brought back agricultural knowledge, or knowledge in modern agriculture from America. Tagore was the first to start farming with tractors in Shantiniketan and earlier in Bangladesh. Tagore was also one of the major movers for the cooperative movement in India, right? And he was following the Irish model, which he had seen, and he wanted to replicate this. He said that there are three. This was said by Elmhurst. He said that the greatest element that hampers our rural prosperity is misunderstanding, because we cannot create large fields which we can irrigate, and we can use tractors. Until and unless we have this system of cooperation, you cannot have greater prosperity. One of the things he started in Shantiniketan, in Sriniketan, was something called a Dharma Gola, where the Gola is a place where a granary. So people would keep their grains in the Dharma Gola in times of plenitude. And when the famine came, they would then withdraw from it, supervised by people from the university. So once again, you see, ecological consciousness, community consciousness, the importance of machinery, but not at the cost of destroying nature. Tagore has a very important essay where he says, can science be humanized? Right? So he was looking at this human sort of sustainable concept of farming at that particular point of time. What we call sustainable agriculture, cooperative agriculture, was something that Rabindranath was experimenting with at that point of time. So he said that is where the university matters. The villagers are waiting for the living touch of creative faith and not the cold aloofness of science. The immense benefit realized by the surrounding villages through the constant inspiration of sympathy and encouragement of Sriniketan must never be befitted in favor of some impersonal abstractions of science, right? Therefore, once again, sustainability is a concept that he introduces at this point of time. I bring two sculptures. In the next slide, we'll see the first of them, once again by Ramkinkar. See, both these sculptures are in the open. Shantiniketan is an open air, museum, as it were. He wanted his students to regularly see this as and when they moved around. This is called the mill call, the call of the mill, right? And you see this Santhal woman joyously moving towards the mill, right? So here is Ramkinkar Bej, who's a follower of Tagore, who is sculpting the Santhal woman as rushing towards modernity. She's also going to participate in modernity. At the same time, you see, if you look at the next slide, this is again the Santhal family, right? And you see how Tagore sees that until and unless the benefits of science are radiated to the earlier woman who's rushing towards modernity with all her joy, she will be burdened with terrible poverty. So Tagore was conscious of Western science, of Western modernity, but he repeatedly cautioned that if it functioned at the destruction of nature, the exploitation of the poor, then this science would not be humanized. This would be a ruthless burden on the human, on the rural poor. Right. Next slide, please. I'm coming to the end, really. So Rabindranath is recognizing the need to acknowledge and reiterate the natural as the force that sustains man. Any threat to this could be construction as a very threat to the basis of civilization. Right? In fact, his last work was Crisis in Civilization, where he says that his faith in man was shaken to the core by what man had made of man. But he then says that I will not lose faith, because losing faith in man is a crime, right? And I will not commit that crime. But at the end of his life, when he saw the Second World War breaking out, he thankfully did not live to see the atom bomb. He was looking at the terrible power of human destruction and the destruction of nature, as it were. He recognized that to generate this awareness and respect, he required a language of spirituality and deification that would formalize and aestheticize this awareness to inculcate the sense of importance of nature among his fellow citizens and ashramites. Therefore, this language would be the language of art, the language of poetry, the language of performativity. He performed, wrote for others as well, but most importantly for young children who were performing his plays, who were looking at his art, who were experiencing his pedagogy. Right? Now, the earlier day we saw, a school in Kerala, which was being praised because it had removed the classroom and sort of created a semicircular arc where every student was at an equidistant from the teacher. In Shantiniketan, every tree was a classroom, and around it, the students would bring their asanas. The student would not sit on his asana, but his friend's asana, right? And therefore, in that age, in 1921 or 1901, even when he was creating Pattabhavan, the school, he was thinking of this equitability in the classroom, the tree becoming a part of this class as a way in which eco-consciousness was part of pedagogy itself. That it was, you did not have to go to a syllabus or a textbook to learn ecology. Ecology and ecological consciousness was part and parcel of your everyday existence, right? And the poetic, aesthetic, environmental, and pedagogic came together within these poems as Tagore wore a mythical presence of nature within the human. Next one, please. I'm just concluding. Now, again, look at the modern ecologists who have looked at what Tagore was talking about. The earlier one, please, if we could. Right. So you have Nicholas Polunin in Growth Without Eco-Disaster, who argues that there is a distinction between what man can do to the biosphere and get from it and what he should do. In the past, the ethic that predominated many developed and successful cultures was man's lordship of nature and his house, his right to harvest or mine the resources of the earth as he wished. Right. And we are looking at, the Paris Accord, and we have already probably breached the 1.5 degree Celsius temperature limit that is threatening glaciers to melt. And India and Pakistan today are experiencing terrible floods. Europe, the last month, I was talking to my friend in Italy who was reporting temperatures of around 46 degrees. So whatever Tagore was warning man of, is actually taking place, right? Next one, please. So, the relevance of Tagore is, it's a one-way street, as it were, a one-way drive towards extinction that we are driving right now. So the key takeaways, finally, Tagore's nature poetry is thus marked by a complex intersection of the spiritual, practical, and the pedagogic. He was falling back upon Indian knowledge systems, but he was moving away from any aesthetic segregation into nature and removal from mankind and from nature. He was accepting nature as part of our consciousness, looking at the beauty of nature, enjoying its beauty, arguing for a sustainability. Creative urge and the joy of the spirit permeated his creative consciousness, right? But he was also alert to realizing the fact that a random exploitation of nature could spell disaster. So his creative and pedagogic instincts, and this is where the performative comes in, to create a series of festivals and poems that could use the aesthetic to remind us of the dependence of human life on the natural and the consequences of neglecting this bond. In this attempt, he developed a distinct formal idiom for these poems that combine the mythical, the joyous, and the spiritual. And I think this complexity provides a density to Rabindranath's ecological consciousness. So it is in this way that an Indian knowledge system was adapted for a certain time period when modernity was, taking shape, was aggressively changing the world. The question therefore remains is, like Tagore, we need a thinker. We have several thinkers, of course, but how, we can adapt a knowledge system for our present day concerns, right? Thank you very much for your attention. And like earlier, I will look forward to your interventions and questions. Thank you, Merelin, for so very patiently carrying us through the PowerPoint. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, once again for that wonderful and marvelous session that you just delivered. You have taken us on a journey through Shantiniketan and illuminated by the philosophical lens of Tagore and enriched by his deep ecological vision. You not only illuminated Tagore's deep ecology vision, but also reminded us of how his philosophy is intricately connected with the Indian knowledge systems and the harmony between man and nature. So you have let us experience how Tagore's thoughts transcend literature and become a guiding philosophy for sustainable living and social justice. And that is what exactly a great deliberation feels like, one that inspires and touches the soul. So thank you so much. We will now quickly take queries from our participants. If anyone has, you could come on the camera, or if you have posted on the chat box. Do we have queries? Anybody from the participant? I think it was so flawless. I mean, there was not a single moment that I lost a track of today's really presentation. So I think it's all understood. We have this experience in the class when we go in, when we ask the students, have you understood? They said yes. And that yes is either they understand everything or they didn't understand. But I have a strong belief in this case that we all have understood thoroughly from beginning to till the end. So if no queries, then we will wind up for
Yes,
with
sorry to
this
interrupt. Like I had to receive a
problem.
call.
Yes, yes, yes.
This is
Indrani.
Indrani here, Amrita. Yes, I was listening to throughout the lecture and all. And I was just thinking, I really don't know because I missed last portion of the presentation. What about our ashram Shongit, Amrita? Because the way we sing, that is also a part of the ecology and all. So what about the ashram Shongit in, that is also based on ecology, I think that can be also applied. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Indrani, for reminding me of that. I had that in mind, but I actually did not bring it up because, most of the people here would not be familiar with it. Now, you see, the motto of Shantiniketan is Yatra Vishwam Bhavat Ekaniram, which is where the whole world makes its home in a single nest. But there was a song for Shantiniketan till 1911, and that song was a Brahmo song. Mora Sottero Pore Bon, Sada Puribo Samorpon, Joy Joy Sottero Joy. So, for truth, we will submit and surrender to truth, hail to the truth, right? Shutta. Now, when Tagore rewrote the Ashram Sangeet, the song for the institution, he rewrote it about the flora and the fauna of Shantiniketan. He talked about the trees, he talked about the existence of the pupils, the students, and the nature as bonded in one great element of friendship. Right? Now, therefore, what we also locate in the Ashram Sangeet, as Indrani was rightly pointing out, by singing the Ashram Sangeet every day, you are actually singing nature. Now, if you can, you see, you can also take a look at, the philosophy of deep ecology, where, deep ecology talks about the interconnectedness of life, right? And Rabindranath's philosophy, in certain senses, was a deep ecology because he was talking about the interconnectedness of the animal, the natural, the tree, and the human. So the tree is not just something inanimate which is to be seen from an anthropocentric view, but it is part and parcel of our family, as it were. That is why it is our neighbor. So that was an interesting angle, which I probably did not want to bring in because of the lack of time. But if anybody is interested, you can take it forward. Thank you, Indrani, for that question. And also very interesting, if you take a look at the national song of Bangladesh, the national anthem of Bangladesh again, he was defining the nation there in terms of its flora and the fauna again, right? So even within the national anthem of Bangladesh, which Bangladesh is unfortunately now trying to forget, Rabindranath was again drawing in an ecological consciousness as part of a national consciousness. That is also something which we should remember, how music functions within ecology. Right, thank you for that question.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any more participants? Yeah.
So may I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Sir, can you talk about, can we look at Rabindranath's works as, maybe some of those non-fictional works which can be looked at as a theoretical background for studies in ecology? Where he has talked about ecological consciousness?
Well, there is, you can take a look at texts like Prakriti Pratishodh, and maybe The Message of the Forest is one essay that he has in terms of a theoretical take on this. There are also essays in Sadhana. Sadhana was an English text that he wrote while he was in America, right? And the American Unitarians took to him greatly. And there's another text which is called Creative Unity, right? Where he talks about this unity between man and nature. But you see, he saw it as part of a greater rhythm of the omnipresent. So in that sense, it is not solely about nature. It is grafted within this larger philosophy of a religion of nature and man that he was creating, right? And you, of course, can take a look also at this very short essay that he has in Religion of Man. This essay is called, there are two essays, in fact. He says, the first is The Man of My Heart, and the other is The Surplus in Man, right? He talks about the angel. The essay is titled The Angel of Surplus, right? Where he says, essentially is that nature is always providing us with a surplus, right? Now, this provides a unique dimension in the sense that he's saying that one does not react to nature to get this surplus or to permeate nature. One needs to react to nature emotively and creatively, right? So in that sense, is articulating a different artistic, aesthetic notion of eco-consciousness. But these are pieces of a larger philosophy rather than very specific texts on, a theoretical take on eco-consciousness. The one text which you could also look at is Rabindranath's introduction to Leonard Elmhurst's book, The Robbery of the Soil, Rabindranath wrote a very long essay on it as to how modern agriculture was destroying the fertility of the soil and how alternative practices in agriculture would be necessary, right? So if you really want to take a look at that, if you're looking at working on ecology as such and looking for theoretical leads, these would be texts to, closely take a look at.
So this was a very interesting take because I have completed my PhD on ecological themes, but I did not know of any Indian author writing on ecology. So all of my eco-criticism was taken from the Western authors.
So you see, this very concept of the Chipko movement.
Right.
Right. Can you see how the thread of the Vriksha Bandhana, of recognizing the sapling as your neighbor, sanctifying it and hugging it and taking it as your own, is actually a thread that runs through, because that is where all these theorists and poets are falling back upon this tradition where the tree and you are not separate at all. So, but then again, I'm sure you have also looked at the works of Vandana Shiva and the other.
Right.
Yes. So that would be part of the Indian consciousness as well.
Right.
Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar.
Sir, one
Yes.
query, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
The philosophy of eco-consciousness innate in the novel Jogajog, sir.
To a certain extent, yes, but I would not put that as an eco-conscious text. If you really want an eco-conscious text, the one eco-conscious text that Rabindranath wrote, where ecology was at the center, was a small short story called Bolai, right? Where this young boy is so much in love with nature that with the death of nature, with the death of the tree, Bolai also perishes. So this would be the one text. Incidentally, the other person who was asking me, I'm sorry I missed your name, ma'am. I would ask you to read a translation of Bolai also, as the one text where Rabindranath is talking about this ecology. Jogajog is much more. It is not just about ecology, right? There's an eco-consciousness, but it is not just mediated by that eco-consciousness.
Sir, most of us who grew up in Bengal has read it as a school text. I have read it in school. I remember.
Oh, you've read it in school, right? Oh, you are from Bengal, so
I am from Bengal. Yeah.
Oh, right.
40
She's Sengupta after all.
Oh, Sengupta, how could I, my apologies.
All right.
For those of you who are not from Bengal, Bolai is a story which has been anthologized in several volumes. So, translations of it are available if you are interested.